Welcome everybody to our lecture. In this lecture, we are going to start working on a new opening, the classical Sicilian. And here, two questions I have to answer. Why I have decided to study a new opening like the Sicilian? And the second question is why I have decided upon the classical Sicilian in particular. Actually, for a long time, I used to meet E4 with E5 with the fair knowledge of the openings arising and an overall good results. But recently I came to a conclusion that a lot of the positions arising after E4, E5 are not suitable for my playing style, and that I need to add some new dynamic opening to my repertoire, so I have decided to study the Sicilian. And why I have decided upon the classical Sicilian in particular? Simply because it is not highly theoretical like other Sicilian lines, such as the famous Najdorf, which needs a lot of time to be studied. Although still, the classical Sicilian contains a fair amount of theory, which needs to be well studied. Also, the classical Sicilian is not the most popular among the other Sicilian lines, and it may represent a good surprising weapon for your opponents. So, I hope you will enjoy our journey through the classical Sicilian, and let's start our lecture. So, E4, C5, the move which characterizes the Sicilian defense. Knight F3, developing the knight and controlling the d4 square. Knight c6 and d4. This is called the open Sicilian. Now black has to take as d5 is threatened, so c takes d5, knight takes d5. All of these are standard opening moves. Knight f6, developing the knight and attacking the pawn on e4. So, knight c3, developing the knight and protecting the pawn on e4. Now, black plays d6, opening the diagonal for his bishop and increasing his control over the e5 square and getting ready for his next move. Now white plays bishop e2, and this is the main move for white in this position. White has many other alternatives, but of course we cannot cover the entire opening in one lecture or even many lectures. So we are going to study the opening from the main line in a descending order towards the less popular moves. So, bishop e2, developing the bishop and getting ready to castle kingside. And now comes the move which characterizes the classical Sicilian from black side, which is e5. Black is immediately challenging white in the center and forcing him to make a decision about the knight on d4. But he does so at the cost of weakening his d5 square, which is now cannot be protected by pawns anymore. But theory has shown that white doesn't get much from controlling the d5 square and that black can generate sufficient counterplay. White has two main moves, knight to b3 and knight to f3. The other knight moves are not challenging. For example, knight takes c6 is illogical and only helps black to strengthen his control over the center, especially the d5 square after b takes c6. Now black's plan is simple. He will play bishop e7, developing the bishop and getting ready to castle kingside, then transferring the knight to the queen side to be able to strike in the center with f5. A simple and a strong plan. For example, queen d3. White also is planning to castle kingside and bring the rook to d1, increasing the pressure against the d6 pawn. A logical plan by white. So, bishop e7, white castles, black also castles, and now rook d1. Now the d6 pawn is under pressure and white is threatening to play bishop to g5 to exchange the knight on f6, after which black is forced to take with the pawn to avoid losing the d6 pawn. And black must prevent this plan, so this is the right time for knight to d7. Black continues with his plan and at the same time preventing bishop g5. So now white plays bishop e3, developing the bishop. Black continues with his plan, so knight b6. Black has no problems if white takes on b6, as he can take with the a pawn, improving his pawn structure, or he can consider taking with the queen, allowing the queen this active post on b6, from which he's attacking the b2 pawn and has chances to increase the pressure against white's queen side through the open b file. So white plays a4, intending a5 to attack the knight, and after a5 by black, he's ready to play f5, attacking the center with a good game. So let's return to the position after e5. In many Sicilian lines, white can play knight to b5, but not this one as far as I know, simply because at the end of this line the e4 pawn is unprotected. Let's see. So a6, knight to a3. There is no other available squares for the knight. And b5, threatening b4, forking the knights. So white is practically forced to play knight to d5. In other Sicilian lines, this position occurs, but with the pawn on f3 supporting the e4 pawn. But now black can simply play knight takes e4. Of course, white has some compensation for the pawn due to his slight lead in development. But a pawn is a pawn, and the computer evaluates this position as equal. So let's return to the position after e5. Now, as I mentioned, white has two main moves. knight b3 and knight to f3. In the next lecture, we are going to focus on the move knight b3, and in the following lecture, we are going to study knight f3. So, I hope that you enjoyed the lecture, and see you in the next lecture.